Hello, everyone. Welcome back to an Ælfric homily project or the Ælfric homily project, as I'm not sure there is any other project named thus. But it has been a few months. This is lecture number 13, I think, supplementary lecture number 13. And so, either for those unaware or because you're new, or for those who are returning, this is a series of lectures that accompany translations of homilies that I have read already in Old English. So we are ready for the first year. Okay, let's see. Actually, December of 2024, I kicked off the project with reading the preface and having our first lecture on the preface, kind of talking about Ælfric and his approach to homily writing. And in that first year, I wanted to do one every month. I failed to do one in October, but besides that, we did one every month. We did some extra stuff too. We did some extra videos, like a video on Lent, a video on Midsummer, and the like. We also did some videos covering parts of Christ One, which are the Advent lyrics. So they're essentially the Old English equivalents to the O antiphons. And that was leading up to Christmas. And now here we are. It's been several months. This last semester of university for me has been taking my time away, but that has just ended in the last couple weeks. So I was able to finalize my translation. Actually, in part, it was difficult, but I'll talk about that in a minute. What's different about this Ælfric homily in particular, though, is that it is not about a holiday. So essentially, I could throw this one out whenever. Now, I did do one of these last year, which was the creation homily, which technically there is no date that we celebrate creation so much. I guess you could, if you wanted to put it at a time, probably put it in March, as there was some medieval theological thought that creation began in March, that week leading up to Lady Day and the Solemnity of Annunciation in March on the 25th. But this one is definitely just not attached to a holiday, so it's close to several feast days. I will say that you can find me, and I don't normally advertise myself so bluntly, but you can find videos. I do similar videos on a couple of different channels. So this one is kind of a mixture. On my channel, Liam's Lyceum, I do videos focused on literature in particular, and a lot of those get philological, and so you can find those pretty often on that channel. They're not really religious in nature, though. And then on a different channel, on Saints and Sages, this one is new. This is a new project. It began in December of last year, so a year into the Ælfric homily project. This one is also with my friends, my friend Sean and my brother Shannon, and that is one that is more religious. So the Ælfric homily project kind of sits in the middle of those. The Saints and Sages, we don't really get too much into language, but we are focused on talking about saints. And like my normal homilies for this project, those are around, or in fact, they're on the Saints' Day, right? So in April, we did Anselm. The month before that, we did Cuthbert. The month before that, we did Bridget. And then we did Mungo, and we did Edmund. We did Edmund a little late. Anyways, but I do not lead all of those. I am there for the discussion, but I do not lead all of them. I have led 3 of the 5, actually, so I've led more than anyone else. But so if those interest you, then you can go and check out Liam's Lyceum, because it might have some more things. I feel like most people who probably watch this channel probably already know of Liam's Lyceum, maybe not. And then Saints and Sages as well. It's just interesting, I think, for some certain people maybe that also like this one. So this was one that always interested me just because I thought the name was very captivating. On False Gods, right? De Falsis Diis. It's also easier to know about because there are a couple sermons by a couple different people actually titled essentially the same thing. And so I was looking actually that in Old English you might say that this would be imb idula godas, or concerning false gods, or you could do imb idwolu godu, as the word god, meaning God, where we get the word God, actually is a neuter, is it instim, I think, and it It is neuter originally, and so it would inflect as go-do in this case. But in most Old English texts, especially after conversion, right, um, we get it inflected to a masculine stem instead of a neuter. And so that makes sense in a sense, because then once after conversion, God is a masculine, so switching it. But at the same time, I mean, it's not. It is an interesting change, right? So yeah, so neuter a stem, masculine a stem. The other word for God being os, of course, or other words for God that you'll see in like Old Norse, but really Old English really only has those two, and God way more than the other ones. So anyways, let's get right into it. We'll have our kind of typical stuff to go over. So in this time, I took the text from Pope for the most part. This is the name of the work it's from. I have the picture of Leusa's over here, but that's just normal. I didn't switch it out. That is my normal source. Leusa hasn't done this one. So if you go to Homilies of Ælfric, a supplementary collection, being 21 full homilies of his middle and later career for the most part, not previously edited, with some shorter pieces, mainly passages added to the second and third series. Pages 667 through 724. That is, I think, volume 2 of that title, technically. And I believe it's from the Old English Text Society or something like that. I can't quite remember off the top of my head. I don't have a copy on at my desk. So this homily, though, is found in 7 manuscripts. Only R is really close to completeness, but C and L of the 12th century give some idea of the original size of the homily as well. And Pope does talk about that if you do happen to have Pope's text. Now, that's actually one of the reasons it took so long, since, I mean, I haven't done a homily since late December. I guess I did a lecture in early January, is I had to type this one all out. The nice thing about the first series of Ælfric homilies is Thorpe's edition is online and easily available to copy and paste into a slideshow like I do, right, to read. I had to type it all out, and that takes a long time, especially if you notice the length of that homily is considerably longer, actually, than any of the other ones I've done. So it is the longest homily we've done. And it is probably riddled with more spelling errors than I would like. Some of them just because I mistyped a lot of them because of autocorrect, which is very frustrating. I caught most of them. I'm sure I didn't catch all of them. If I was editing these again to publish as in an actual text form, I would edit through them again. But it's similar to the issue I probably had with St. Swithin's homily back in July, that, again, I had to type that one all out, and that surely brought room in for errors. And so we have an interesting homily, though, this time, right? We have a homily that is on false gods, right? Again, it's something that, in a sense, that, like, how do I put this? Even if I don't take this as a super religious sense, I find personally that all humans are religious. That they have this story they tell themselves, they have a myth of themselves, and they have a set of beliefs, often really just a set of presuppositions, right? How they view the world, right? Even people who say they're not religious, in a sense, they essentially have their own religion. And so then you could say that there's still a lot of Christians in the world today. And I think Ælfric, though, would write this homily, very differently. I do think, in some sense, that that he could have written a version, or he might write a version strictly to other Christians and say, you're following the wrong form of the religion. Right? I mean, in his day, there was not quite the schism. Right? There is a difference, I guess, in Western traditions and Eastern traditions at the time. Right? The filioque has been around for centuries at the time Ælfric is writing, but the schism itself has not officially occurred. But after, the Protestant Reformation, like, he might have written, this is the best form of Christianity here, or whatever that form would be. I guess maybe Anglicanism. Who knows? Not exactly what Ælfric would go with, but and so. But I also think he would write a similar homily on false gods. And I will say that most people do not believe in Jove or Thor or Odin or Mars or whatever. There are neo-pagans, of course, but it's a relatively very minor population. And I think mostly what he would actually focus his homily on then are, well, essentially in response to increased secularization, even amongst people who are nominally Christian, right? As Alfred says, right, we had the name of Christians, but not the customs or the virtues of Christians in his preface to Gregory's Pastoral Care. And so I think that would be really relevant, in a sense. Via whatever it is, right? The people who take science to be infallible and trust in it, like religion, or people who, I mean, really anything, right? I read a lot of literature, and a lot of it's imaginative, speculative, and there's certain people in that group who take this idea of entertainment as this literature to entertain you as like sacrosanct, right? Which is to say that the word entertainment is essentially sacred, right? And if you imply that you do some reading for anything besides entertainment, that is a big no-no. It's taboo, essentially, um, which I find very odd, right? So in a sense, that's their religion. You also see it in the way that they attach themselves to these fictional characters. So that's kind of an aside. Now these are the two thumbnails we have here. We have Woden on the right. This is kind of him being displayed as an ancestor of Anglo-Saxon kings. And that's a very popular, probably the most popular Old English Anglo-Saxon association image we have of Odin, I should say, in a manuscript, as there are other ones. But even this is the cover of Woden by Stephen Pollington from a couple years ago, I think now, from Uppsala Books, which is a great book if you're interested in Woden at all. And then here we have a much later 18th century manuscript of Odin on his late horse, Sleipnir. So he's a very popular figure. When we think of false gods, you might think this is going to get heavily into Norse paganism, and it really doesn't actually. And in a sense, the homily is not out of fear. Actually, it is more so out of extreme confidence. That is the vibe that Ælfric gives off, the tone. So again, not a holiday. So again, I kind of already just talked about this, right? So it's fear of English regressing to paganism or praising the greater power of the Christian God. Now there is some of this, of course, not maybe so much where Ælfric is in Winchester, but there, of course, there is some fear of this. We do have other authors in a similar period talking about this, but it's not actually a big deal. Ælfric is talking. He was writing right around the time, a lot of his homilies at least, right around the time that, like, say, Iceland converts to Christianity, and these other Norse kingdoms are converting to Christianity, and so, and by the time he's dead, they're pretty much Christian. So now, in some sense, it's maybe, I mean, like, it's a little different than like Cuthbert. Like Cuthbert, for example, considerably earlier, he's preaching to a population who maybe was just like barely Christian, and a lot of them are probably still heathen, right? Because the name pagan itself implies you're from the country, so you're not in the city where everyone's converted and you're still out doing superstitious things. So it's not that actually. We have had Christianity for quite a while, right? And the arguments he makes are definitely not arguments you would give to a pagan. And we'll actually kind of talk about that in a minute when we talk about an adaptation of Ælfric's homily. But so it definitely seems, again, to show the greater power of the Christian God. It is based heavily on a 6th century sermon, De Correctione Rusticorum, by Martin of Braga. Also, 1 Samuel, the Book of Daniel, Serapis episode is a conflation of Rufinus' Historia Ecclesiastica and Cassiodorus' Historia Tripartita. So we have a lot of sources. That's not all of them, but those are the heavy-hitting ones, I would say. One thing you also noted that a lot of people, most people are aware of, is this Interpretatio Romana, excuse me, which is very, very, very common in the medieval period, which is to say that Thor, as he mentions here, is Jove. Interestingly, which is not so much from this Interpretatio Romana, but an obvious choice from Ælfric, is that this is not Thunor. Actually, he uses the Norse term Thor. Similarly, it's Odin, not Woden, but Odin is Mercury, right? However, worship at mountains described, actually, and Ælfric mentions this, worship at mountains describes Woden more than Mercury, right? And Martin of Braga only mentions crossroads, for example, when discussing Mercury. He doesn't mention mountains. Much evidence is from place names, and then this is from Pope. In all probability, Ælfric had heard enough about the religious ceremonies of the Danes to know of this feature, and it was natural for him to attribute it to Mercury, since he was considering Mercury and Odin as the same deity. It seems possible that he was also aware, if only from place names, that the same god, called Woden, had been worshipped on high places by his ancestors. But whatever he may have known about the English Woden, he kept to himself, which is to say, he literally just doesn't mention the English gods at all, and he'll even go out of his way slightly to not mention them. So he does seem very reluctant to talk about it. Again, and so yeah, he goes out of his way when mentioning the days of the week. He mentions the English days Sunday and Monday and Saturday. But he doesn't mention Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, which still in modern English have these pagan gods names in them. He'll mention the Norse equivalents, but not the English equivalents. For example, Frigg is Venus is probably how he would have said it, something like that, but not free. And so they're all euhemerized, right? Which is say demythologized. They're just humans, a la Augustine, sorry, or Wulfstan or Snorri. I misspelled Wulfstan there. Apologies. Yeah, Snorri famously does this in his Prose Edda, right, where I believe it's Thor that he calls a Trojan. So it's very, very normal, very normal. And then we also have this idea, switching topics here, of this power of God. Well, maybe, yeah, so not strictly switching topics. Again, we're showing the power of God. We're avoiding the names of these pagan gods in English because Ælfric wants to avoid them. He's uncomfortable probably with it. But God is so great, right, that he can he has these power over these false gods, right? Or these people who are not gods at all, really, right? They're false gods. These are people, right? They're euhemerized. And so his power is greater. He is the god of everything. He is the god of creation. Now, I do think that Ælfric is a little funny there because, I mean, these pagan stories have creation stories. And we know some of them, and we can reconstruct a good amount of it that we don't have. So, I mean, these pagans do have creations. Heck, I mean, like the Enuma Elish for as far as like Middle Eastern stuff is considered, or Egyptian myth, or Greek myth, or Norse myth, right? We do actually have creation accounts of this, so he's just kind of ignoring those. I'm not sure how well aware he would have been of them, but it's interesting though that the power of God is the focus here, and the Christian God, capital G God, right, can make it so that lice bother Adam after he has transgressed, but the dragon, the most powerful, right, will not bother him before he's transgressed, right? That God can essentially bring these about, or as the story of Gregory illustrates, that God can kick another God out of his own temple. So God is greater, right? God is great in a sense. He's the coolest. He's the baddest. He's the best. So one thing I do think that's interesting, actually, that I can't even remember how this came up in the homily, but I believe the sun is mentioned, and you can see that or maybe it's the moon. Yes, they're both mentioned. Okay, that's what it is. And if you look at the pronouns referring to them, you'll notice that the sun is feminine and that the moon is masculine. Now, this is a pretty normal way to translate it, is it. Okay, but I will note actually that this seemingly actually was a concept, likely, at least it was in the Norse stuff. Can't quite compare it completely to Anglo-Saxon stuff, but which is interesting. This is actually the opposite of the classical world, right? You have the moon often being feminine and the sun being masculine, and say like Greek and Roman stuff. It is the opposite here. You do have an example actually from Völuspá, the prophecy of the Cirrus in Old Norse. Sálvarp sunan sinimana hendi inur hugri himiniöder sol thatne visi far hon sali ati mani thatne visi kvat han megenzati stjurn thatne visu stadi atu. So the sun, companion of the moon, cast from the south her right hand over the brim of heaven. The sun did not know where she had halls. Stars did not know where they had steads. The moon did not know what might he had. I actually kind of switch around the moon and stars aspect there, but and you also even have this idea of the moon, or of the sun, in a sense, actually being feminine, even in Lord of the Rings. Actually, on page 54 of the Tolkien illustrated version that came out maybe 5 years ago, with the red edges on the end. and the white dust jacket. Anyway, so one day it was very hot, and as he was bending over a pool, this is talking about Gollum, he felt a burning on the back of his head and a dazzling light from the water paint his wet eyes. He wondered at it, for he had almost forgotten about the sun. Then, for the last time, he looked up and shook his fist at her. Right. Really just offhanded comment in Lord of the Rings, but I noticed it last time I was reading it, which was recently because I'm rereading it to my children. So we'll get into the words of note now. Okay, so we have Folicha, which if you I say I don't when I write these out, I do not use the modern academic markers. So in a modern academic text, you'd see this one written out as FU with a line over the U. The older way of doing it was just an accent to show that it's a long U. And so that's actually how you note the difference. This first aspect here on the left is exactly how you spell fully, but or one way to spell it at least. But here it's actually foully, so it's foully done, not fully done, and it makes much more sense that way in context. In this, it comes up a couple times in the homily. We also have gal, which means wanton or lustful or wicked. I'm not really sure if it survives in modern English, but if it did, it'd probably be like goal, like a Gole, probably, I'd imagine. So, and then we have bienja, which is worship or a walking with, literally. So a bienja is a walk with her, essentially a worshiper. Note that one comes up a couple times as well. You have miltestra, which is from Latin meretrix, which is a whore or prostitute. You also have indenix, which is end next or last, final or end. Last, final is probably the more common translations here. You also have shrin, which is an ark or a reliquary or a shrine, as the word shrine, from Latin scrinium, which is actually a slightly semantic difference, often in modern English, as it really means more of like a reliquary, not like a sacred place, like broadly speaking. It's more of like a box, right? So like ark meaning like a chest, essentially, right? So that's really more of the sense it has in Old English. Shrine has drifted slightly semantically in modern English. And then you have swikan, which means to wander, but can also mean to deceive. Modern swike is descended from it, again, not a common word. We get on to more words. So we have dizikan, which is stupid or foolish, is the word dizzy. This is just how it appears in the homily, at least. You have bishop, which I spelled in modern English, so apologies there. Bishop, whatever, right? It's a bishop, but it can also mean, in other contexts, it can mean like a high priest, a prelate, stuff like that, right? So the word bishop looks kind of funny when it's not talking about a Christian person, and we don't use it that way in modern English, but in Old English you can. So also kristnoda, which is from the verb, that's how it appears here, but it's kristnian, which means to Christian, or Christian rather, or to Christianize. That can mean either one. You have idrinka, which is a fellow drinker, or a companion, which is actually synonymous with another Old English word, yeber, which means a fellow beerer, essentially someone who drinks beer with you. And that actually is related to the word beership, which is beership, right? Which is the like kind of the activity of drinking beer. Probably one that actually probably could have stayed around in modern English. And you have Aden, which I thought was worth mentioning because it kind of looks like iron. If you don't know what the Old English word for iron is, which is isiron. There's actually several versions of it, but isiron maybe is like a standard. This means brazen in this case, right? It literally is orin, r, not ad so much, but r is a more standard form, and it is or in modern English, so it's orin essentially, right? But it really doesn't always just mean or; it can mean brass or copper. And so, actually, because it means brass here, it probably means more brass instruments, which is actually a very common thing. Bronze and brass are not always differentiated in ancient texts, ancient language, whatnot. Even in modern English, something can say, "Oh, it's brazen" or "it's bronze," and it actually might just be brass. Not so much the last 100 years or so, but not too long before that, actually. So, something we might be called bronze could actually be what we call brass. So, the first year, actually, brass though is copper or tin, and then the bronze is copper. Copper and tin is bronze. Copper and zinc is brass. In reality, but again, in some older texts, they don't really differentiate. So when something is brazen or bronze, it might actually be brass. Now, it might not. It probably really doesn't matter that much to you. Just a heads up. So we also have bertuila, which is bright while, literally, which is kind of a bright period of time. So often you can translate this as like a moment or a glance, which is interesting little form. Also, one thing I wanted to mention, this line here, "Thu leova king, leova thu un echnisa." So you can also see the way it is to remind you actually that the late Old English pronunciation, this late West Saxon, is a little different than your early stuff. You'll note if you know Old English pronunciation that one thing I do stick to is these Y's, which is to say that I do not pronounce them how an earlier Old English Y would be pronounced and be E or something like that. E. And they're pretty much gone by the time Ælfric is writing, right? And you can see that based off how many times Y is actually just thrown in a word that would traditionally, like an early West Saxon, not have a Y, right? It would have an I. Or in this case, you can see it where a word that traditionally has a Y has an I, and that's kinning here, which earlier would have been kinning or something like that, right? So see Y. Here you can tell it's already gone away. Essentially, you don't say that anymore. I mean, there's other things. One thing that the writing tradition is not like clear on is actually that the final UM endings are already pretty much like collapsing. It's just like scribal tradition at this point. They're actually often spelled Owen, right, instead of UM, and you actually probably would have said them as like a schwa, like an right? And so the inflectional system's already collapsing in late Old English, largely from just time, but also from influence from Old Norse in the period, and then it's going to change quite a bit more in what we would call modern English or Middle English. So just note that was an aside, but so we have here. This is how I translated it, or you can translate it. Thou beloved King, may thou live forever. But what's interesting here is that you could say Leova, that second one. There's two Leovas, right? Leova and Leova. They don't mean the same thing. So the first one is actually dear. Leova is Leof. It's a weak in this case, and it means dear or beloved. And then the second is an inflection of Levion, or it could be an inflection of Levion, which is say a singular imperative to be pleasant or to delight, but also could be the exact same singular imperative of Liban, which is to live, or Livion, right? So Daniel 6:21 clarifies this. So right, thou beloved King, may thou delight forever or please forever or whatever, right? But it really then said Daniel unto the king, O king, live forever, right? That is that's the King James version at least. So we know actually, but it does seem like maybe like intentional wordplay, right? Like, or at least maybe wordplay that, while not intentional, because it just makes sense here, that it was probably appreciated. So, anyways, also Ælfric does mention something I thought that was worth mentioning to you. And that is the sixth age. Now, there are a lot of ages in a sense, like you could divide the world up into several groupings 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, right, whatever. Then we actually find evidence of these in Old English. And you'll get actually a talk of these in Old Age and Early Medieval England and Cultural History by Thies Pork. I have talked about it on my Liam's Livestream channel, actually. That mentions the age groupings in relationship to how they compare to ages of men, right? Which is to say, like old age, young youth, adulthood, whatever, right? And how that is compared by other authors. Ælfric doesn't do that here. He's not comparing it to people, but he does mention the sixth age, right? De Halende Christ kom to disse werelde undara sixtan ilde. So when the healer Christ came to this world in the sixth age, or Eld would be the modern descendant of Ilda there. And so this comes actually from six Aetatis Mundi of Augustine. And this next part is from Pork himself. So Infantia from Adam and Noah, these are the six ages. Puritia from Noah to Abraham, Adolescentia from Abraham to David, Juventus from David under the Babylonian captivity, the two user. There's Signoris from the Babylonian exile, the coming of Jesus Christ, and finally Senectus, which would last until the end of time. So you do have that on display here. And then also similar texts, I think if you're interested in going further, we spend a lot of time with Daniel, if you've watched homily here. And so we get portions of the story of Daniel, particularly the middle and later chapters, though, dealing with Darius and Cyrus. The Old English Daniel, though, which is a poem, Old English Daniel, deals with the earlier chapters in Nebuchadnezzar. So if you think, if you were to have the rounded out story, then that might be something you're interested in. That is not prose; it is poetry, so it'll be considerably more difficult. But also note that one of the last, I think the last story we get with Daniel actually mentions is the story of Bel and the dragon episode, and it is often considered deuterocanonical. It is not in every Bible today, I should say. This is kind of an aside. We mentioned Odin, as Ælfric called him earlier, right? And that is Woden, Willa, and Whale. Right, in Maxim 1, which is wisdom poetry, really, really great. Maxim 1, Maxim 2 are awesome. You should go read them. But we have a mentioning of Woden, actually, strictly in it. It seems to be alluding, actually, to his brothers. Woden worked the whales, Woder Aldwalda, Ruma, Roderas, right? Woden wrought idols. The glory all ruler wrought roomy heavens, roomy skies, or roomy constellations, right? Actually, I like the translation of constellations for Roderas, as it is related to the word rotate. And the constellations are the things rotating really consistently, I would say, in the sky. So we have this then very common if you've read like Gylfaginning, there's your high, just as high, and third. There's probably these three guys. But Woden, Odin, there is a loss, probably in the 600s or so, of initial wa in Old Norse before rounded vowels, which is why Odin does not alliterate with vili and ve. Note then that they also don't have a wa in vili and ve either, but in the Viking Age they probably would have. Actually, it would have been wili in a way. By the time Old Norse is being written down, really, the text we have, that sound change would have already pretty much solidified, so it would have been vili and ve. So it just depends on the time you're going for there. Just with the diachronic approach, just consider that. But Woden, Odin, coming from a Woldenaz, a Proto-Germanic, something similar to that at least. Wolf in Old English sounds like sound, speech, poetry, or cry. Proto-Germanic probably also had meanings of like inspiration or rage, and so the leader of inspiration is like this poet, right? A Wolfsbora in Old English is a poet, essentially, right? A bearer of Wolf, right? Willa, or Vili, or Wili, if you will, comes from a Proto-Germanic Wilio, which is will or desire. Pretty straightforward. And then you have a whale, or ve, or way, and it coming from a Proto-Germanic wichas, which means sacred or holy. Now here it is, seemingly idols. It has gotten a rather negative sense. This is actually the word for priest, though, or a common word for priest, I believe, in Gothic, if I remember correctly. There's gudia, which is related to the word god, essentially means like godder, a godder, right? Which sounds funny. Anyways, but yeah, whale, or we, as it is sometimes, means idol. But you do have other things like whalewood, right, which is related, and it means it's coming from like a wheel, a build, or something like that, and it is altar. And so that not necessarily negative, actually, right? So interesting though. You also have in German Weihnachten, which are holy nights, which is the days of Christmas, or a couple of them at least. It's probably also related to the word victim. So you can look more into that one if you would like. One thing that is worth mentioning, and we'll go just briefly over parts of it, not the whole thing, is Wulfstan's related homily, that is De Falsis Deis. So just a more classic inflection of Deus on the end as opposed to Ælfric's Diis. So this is building mostly on Ælfric's lines 72 through 161. It is considerably shorter. It is preserved in Oxford Bodleian Library, Hatton 113, which was compiled at Worcester between 1064 and 1083. Wulfstan became Bishop of London in 996. Drew up law codes for Athelred. Canute was Bishop of Worcester from 1002 to 1016, and Archbishop of York from 1002 to 1023. So the Cambridge Old English Reader actually has this right here. This is the book. And and you can find it. It will give you a little bit of background information, right? It talks about Wulfstan a little bit. There's actually a couple Wulfstan things in here. I'm not sure. There's an Ælfric thing in here. I'd have to look at it again. But Wulfstan, we have 4 sermons of his that survive in Latin, 22 in Old English. He's rather eschatological, which is kind of end of the world subjects, right? He's a very distinct style, forthright, emotive, often bombastic, and it makes a sharp contrast with the quietly persuasive style of Ælfric. That's what Marston says in here. So intensifying prefixes on verbs, lots of alliteration, tautological pairs, imperatives, right? Tautological pairs, kind of still do those in English, but he's got a style that is very hefty, if you will. So let's look a little bit at it. Just the first, the opening almost. So, alla gifirn is that thur devil fella thinga misfor that man keen to swida god miskyrde and that hathingship. Is me alles to weed swida, idereda and eat deret weed. Nerada we thar harwar on bokum that man rare ani hadden hier darwar an worlde an allem sem fyrste se was noes flode. Ag síðan dat je war that nimbruth and that etnas workten, thona wonerde lichan stipula after noes flode and him thaswa, fella irerde, I lamp thas de bitch sijeth. Swa thara wirten a was. And so you kind of get an idea here of what he's doing. 1 second. And I mean, you can tell it's sort of on the same topic. At least it doesn't have the same opening. One thing that is very obvious, actually, is that he doesn't say, hello, beloved people or beloved brethren or whatever, or even brothers and sisters or something like that. He just says, alas, right? He seems a little different on probably where he's preaching in particular, but also just in personality. But again, I'll just quickly translate this. I typed this up earlier. So, as the last long ago was through the devil that many things have gone astray, and that mankind too greatly disobeyed God, and that heathenship hurt very widely, and yet or still hurteth widely. We, however, did not read anywhere in books that people raised any heathen idols anywhere in the world, and all the time that was before Noah's flood. Which, I mean, it's very sparse, the story we get before Noah's flood. But later it came to pass that Nimrod and the giants wrought the wonderful tower after Noah's flood. And for them, as many workers as there were, as put were in there twice for some reason, sorry, the books say, so there were as many languages. And I switched it around to make it more sense in modern English. But then Dasidan, Torverdon, he weede landes an man kin the sonnes wieder weoks. And tha at Nistan, worden he bepacht, Thur thona aldan deoval. De Adam jur arbeswak, swathat he worked on wolicha and edolicha. Him hadden a godes and thona zodan god and hura ayana. Shipen for arwo, awon. The hitum manum yeshop and ye worked. It's interesting they use both there. He shaped them, or created and created them, or he shaped and wrought them, essentially, right? So then afterwards they widely dispersed across wide lands, and mankind immediately waxed strong. And I do say that where is it? Wolicha and Yed Wolicha definitely is very purposeful. So and then at the last they became deceived through the old devil, who long ago before betrayed Adam, so that they wrought wrongly and heretically heathen gods for themselves, and the true God and their own shapers scorned, who shaped and wrought them as people. I'm translating this very literally, but it is you can already kind of see some of his style coming through. But that's all I'm going to cover right now. Again, you can get Marsden's stuff. Also, I will note that Wulfstan's Diis is actually more readily available online, from what I can tell, than Ælfric's. So, and go and look that up if you're interested. One other thing I think that's very worth mentioning, and this is actually kind of our end here. This is our Codicology Corner, where we're going to go over the Old Norse adaptation, and that is from Umthat Fadan Atru Hovsk. I don't know. My Old Norse pronunciation is not as great as I would like it to be. So some would ask whether or not this is from an antecedent or from Ælfric, which is to say, is this coming from the same place Ælfric is taking it, or is it from Ælfric himself? Now, the order is actually exactly the same as Ælfric's, and there was no preceding vernacular homily on this topic. So Pope seems right then in suggesting that the Old Norse is directly inspired by Ælfric's homily. It also foregoes, in this case, mentioning the weekday names like Ælfric does, but that is something done only after the adaptation or adoption of Christianity, which say weekdays having names, and the audience may not have even been familiar with these weekdays then at the time. And so the Romans, for example, have an 8-day week before they adopt Christianity. Weeks are just not like if you need something shorter than a moon, right? Like a month, then you come up with something. But I mean, 7 days is very much from the Judeo-Christian worldview of creation taking that long. So if you want a little bit, this is a really short article, by the way, but if you want a little bit more information, you can see the Old Norse translations of Ælfric's De Falsis Diis and De Augris in Hauksbók, by Donata Kick. And so we do have some interesting things here, right? This topic, one thing we're going to just cover the very beginning of this mine, so we're not going to get too much into it, but that it is you don't get a lot of the theological arguments, I would say, in the Ælfric adaptations into Old Norse, right? You get a lot of they're more Wulfstanian in some sense, but they follow Ælfric and not Wulfstan, so they seem to come from Ælfric. But which is just to say that stay away from this superstitious stuff, right? You guys were recently pagans in a sense, right? They don't have the centuries of Christianity. But anyways, let's get into it. So we're gonna go on to Folium 4R of Hauksbók, which is today marked as AM 54444TO, Árni Magnússon Institute for Icelandic Studies in Reykjavík, Iceland, of course. Note that while originally Hauksbók was originally one text, one codex, is now three. And so this first one is the manuscript, essentially, that we'll look at. I think I'll probably share this other one at the bottom. This is mine. I'm kind of doing certain edits on it, similar to some documents that I've mostly seen from Carl Edlund Anderson, who was one of my Old Norse professors, actually, where he takes, he'll have, it's like a complete edition, which is to say, like, he'll have one, like, for example, if a story it survives in multiple manuscripts, which some Old Norse texts do, that you just put them both, right? Like Völuspá, for example, has Hauksbók stuff in it, but it also has Codex Regius. And then sometimes you'll do like a standardized version, because the one thing you'll note actually is how these are the texts. The academic texts are standardized in Old Norse is different than how they are in Old English. One thing that actually kind of bothered me with something like Eddic poetry is that the half lines are actually full lines in Old Norse. All right, so the two lines alliterate, while in Old English you actually have them both together, and that the one line alliterates the first half line and the second half line. But let me pull this up. So I will note actually that Old English, in a sense, if you're more familiar with Old Norse stuff, Old Norse has a lot of forms. In some sense, that's because a lot of this is older. I mean, you do have something similar to was it Drokvat, the skaldic form in one Old English poem, and that is the rhyming poem, which is actually very complex. Not quite the same, similar, but most really Old English poetry is written in Fornithslag, which is like old rhyming form, essentially. And so, but in Eddic poetry, you get a lot of forms, but Old English, that's essentially the form. So let me switch now over to this. They made it easier for me to switch. So here is the manuscript. This will be linked down below if you can go look at it yourself. You can see this capital L is actually exactly where we want to go. Nope. I apologize in advance. I might be doing that more often, as yeah, my mouse is broken. So it double clicks now, and I haven't been able to fix it. So you can actually see the title up here. So we have and this is doing a similar thing to typical Anglo-Saxon manuscript, which is a superscript saying we got rid of the nasal, right? So it's which is the same as imb, concerning, about, whatever. let's zoom in on like a little more. So im, that, this is gonna be annoying. The way if I figure out how to control it with my mouse pad does on this computer doesn't work either. So im that hwadan, which note at this time this U would actually, this is more of a Latin, a manuscript like tradition, and so this would actually be that hwadan otru, right? And there are no markers actually over otru, but in a standardized Old Norse, you'd have this. I will show you again when I bring up my document at the end, which is far from complete, by the way. I have not had the time. I will not have the time for a while, but if you want to look at it, add comments. If you want to do the work yourself, can go ahead. And then Hauksbók. So you can kind of see that there's like a long S type of thing going on here too. But this is actually really hard to understand. I will note that I think reading Old Norse manuscripts is tougher. It's kind of more akin to some of the Middle English manuscripts, and it's from around the same time period though. So, goodness gracious, my mouse decides it likes me. Nope, still not there yet. Okay. Yeah, see, why is it doing that? Okay, whatever. No, I'd like it not to. Can I get it to stop like holding it without turning the page? Okay, great. So you see the capital L, that's the beginning. It's Ljúfur right here, Ljúfur, which is, it's an I. This is in a standard Old Norse manuscript. You'd have a J here, so like a Ljúfur. This is the same word as Leof. Okay, so it is beloved. And then you have Brüder right here, Brüder, which is brothers. So very similar to Ælfric's opening in this case. And you have a sva is a U, but again it'd be a V. And again, in Viking Age, this would have been an actual wa sound, so swa, just like the Old English. At this point, it's already a V. So sva segya is a long S. Segya, again, it's an I here, but it's segya. Note that I actually plays the same role in some Old English, not most of the time. Note that it's really only I's after R's, right? Herjan. What's the other one? Derjan, right? Herjan is to praise, right? Ushulan Herjan in Cadman's hymn. Derjan might actually be related. No, not Derjan. It's Berjan. Berjan, Old Norse Berja, might be related to the word brother even. Interesting, but a different topic. So it's an I though in the Old English spelling, but RI makes a yeah. All right, so the I after that R makes a yeah. So, and then you have os. It's os. Okay, it looks like ol almost. So this is us actually. So says us, or it's told to us rather in this case. So tells us, Helgar Ritningar. Let me move this, please. No. Okay, well, we got where we wanted. Ritningar Hversu. Versu. I'm not really sure. This is like a Versu. So the ER is just, there's a lot more abbreviations. So Versu. Ver. I think that's it right there. Ver is next, which is R. So tells us how holy writings. So tells us holy writings how we should. Should is actually right here. So skolum. Yes, or skulum in a more standard Old Norse, not an O here. Skulum a drot. Oh, it's great. Okay. Yes, droten, I think. Yes. Droten, yes. So droten, which is Lord, Drichten, right? Varn. Trua. Ok. which is oak. It's a common Old Norse word for and. It's related not to ak, but ak, which is also. It can mean also in Old Norse as well. So, oak, it's got a C here. Normally in Old Norse text, it's spelled a K if you're reading academic texts. So we got Adroten var trua oak melir. Yes, that's melir, which is more standard as like a malir, which is to like speak, to kind of declare in this case. It's mel, the word mel in English, related to like Mathalóla. And then we have, oh, I turned the page. I think I turned the page. I looked away for just a second. And then it goes back. Okay, here we are. This is obnoxious. I apologize. So here's Merir. Yeah, okay. Sva at ein erguth ok ein. I think it's actually ok ein. This is ein. I think it's supposed to be like number one, right? So we, beloved brothers, so tells us Holy Writings how we should believe in our Lord and declare that God is one and there is one. Oh, it's right here. Almeneleg. True. The end there. Why? That's delayed. Okay. Ok. No, I'm right here. Okay. In Kristen. It's funny because they'll put these nasals and it's just getting the superscript over the nasals and they're just getting rid of another N. So like Ain up here is A-I-N in the standard Old Norse. Kristen in the nominative, right, is often going to have two N's here. Domr, so Christendom, essentially, right? Ok ein Guth, right? Guth is God. One God, yeah, okay. One Christian religion, one God of all, essentially. If I'm reading this correctly. Yeah, okay, it is God. And then it actually says says al outs. It's a Z, which would be normally like an als fader, sorry, fader, old English fader, but here it's fader, or and then aus again. You have the Z. Why you do this to me? All right. Now I'm lost because I actually went forward and not backwards. Okay, that's fader or aus granda, which is actually more of a grandi and a standard. You're going to see that a couple times, actually, these E's on the end where you would expect an I. Right here as well. So, ok valdanda, so valdandi, ok rathandi, okay, which is, so we have one Christian religion, one father of all, and the maker of all, and powerful and ruling, right? So, Waldand, right? I'm not sure if I have an old English equivalent to this, but then it starts again, right? Like in Han egum right, right here, yeah. So you can get more into this if you would like. I would like to actually do more of that work. I'm going to show you real quick just the work I have gotten done on it. Apologies, actually, I forgot my microphone is more sensitive to that. I got a new microphone. But this is the manuscript here. Again, it's very early in this version. And let us see. I'm going to show you the version I have that might help you a little bit. We're going to switch to this tab. Yeah. Okay. So you can see this. Let's see if I can zoom in. Okay, let me just do that. So essentially, you have what you have in Hauksbók, which is kind of being standardized actually already to a sense, right? This is not like being super confusing where it's having a long S, right? Like it would right here. This is getting rid of superscripts entirely, right? That you have the two ends. I'm actually taking this from someone. Who did this? I can't remember. Let's see. 301. It was who did this edition? I'm looking. Because you can get this edition essentially, if you want the stuff on the left, who already does it from the manuscript for you. I had a hard time figuring out who did this, so. Huh, I'm not sure. Yeah. I'll try to link that version down there as well, because I think this is also online, the book version, where the standardized text is, where I'm getting it. The stuff in the middle is me standardizing it. If I made an error, just let me know. And this is also my translation. About how unbelief began is essentially the closer translation of the Old Norse about how unbelief began. So, yeah. So if you're interested, you can tell I haven't had the time actually. This is kind of a headache work. It's fun. Don't get me wrong. It's just considering I don't get paid for this, and it certainly hasn't helped me get a job. This is all when I have time. This is all passion. This is led by passion. And so I'll just stop sharing completely now, actually. Um, but thank you for watching. I hope that it has been productive, that you've learned something. Again, as always, if I've done anything blatantly wrong, let me know. In some sense, I'm still learning, for sure. I mean, I'm always still learning, but this has become something that I think I might actually, in a sense, be able to turn into proper academic work, in a sense. As I still work on my degrees that I am doing right now. So, anyways, thank you for watching this latest lecture of the Ælfric Homily project. Hopefully, I will have another one of these out before too long. Hopefully not 4 months late, in a sense. But I'm not actually entirely sure on what I will do next, because I don't want to, say, pick something like, say, yeah, the Feast of John the Baptist, right, in June, right? I would love to do that. But I already have one presentation I need to give in early June and another presentation I need to give in late June. I really feel like it'd probably be irresponsible of me to say I'm going to do John the Baptist in June, even though I'd really like to. So I'm going to see what I can figure out, because I do think that likely the next one will be, or I would like it to be, one attached to an actual holiday that we have not covered before. I mean, if I had had more time, I would have done another Easter one, actually, because Easter being such an important holiday, it really wouldn't hurt to have a second Easter homily, and even a second lecture, because that last one was almost 2 hours, by far the longest. I think I could probably come up with more. So, anyways, thanks for watching, though. Again, I appreciate it. I hope you've learned something, and let me know if you have any questions. I'm very glad to answer questions, and if I don't know, I'm very glad to find out. So, thanks for watching, and have a blessed